In the early 1900s, at a time when segregation defined nearly every aspect of American life, something extraordinary was taking shape in the heart of Tulsa, Oklahoma. In the Greenwood district, African Americans were quietly building an economic powerhouse, one born not from privilege, but from determination. This place would later be known as Black Wall Street. It was more than a neighborhood. It was a bold statement that prosperity, dignity, and independence were possible even in the face of exclusion. Imagine walking down streets lined with black-owned banks, hotels, newspapers, grocery stores, doctors' offices, and theaters. Money circulated within the community. Families owned homes. Children saw success modeled every day. At a time when opportunity was systematically denied, Greenwood created its own future. This was not accidental, it was the result of vision, discipline, cooperation, and an unbreakable belief in self-reliance. But Black Wall Street was never just about wealth. It was about safety, pride, and control over one's destiny. Churches, schools, and civic groups formed the backbone of a community that refused to accept the limits placed upon it. Greenwood stood as living proof that segregation did not equal inferiority, and that truth made it powerful. In today's video, we are going to explore how Black Wall Street rose, why it mattered so deeply, and what its story reveals about success, resistance, and vulnerability in American history. This is not just a story of the past. Its echoes still shape conversations about inequality, opportunity, and memory today. If you value historical stories that go beyond textbook stories that explain not just what happened, but why it matters, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss future documentaries. Now, let us go back to Greenwood before the name Black Wall Street became a symbol, and before its legacy was forever changed. By the time Greenwood was earning the nickname Black Wall Street, the foundations described earlier had already transformed into something visible, vibrant, and deeply alive. The same determination that drove African Americans to seek economic independence under segregation now shaped every street, every storefront, and every daily routine within the district. Greenwood was not a distant ideal of success. It was a lived experience, unfolding from morning until night in ways that felt both ordinary and remarkable. As the sun rose, Greenwood's streets filled with purpose. Business owners unlocked the doors of banks that offered loans when white institutions would not. Hotel lobbies welcomed traveling black professionals who were barred from staying elsewhere in the city. Newspapers rolled off local presses, carrying stories that reflected the community's own voice rather than one filtered through hostility or neglect. These institutions were not merely businesses. They were anchors of stability, ensuring that Greenwood's residents could plan, invest, and dream with confidence. Wealth moved deliberately within the community, circulating again among black-owned enterprises. A single dollar might pass from a customer at a grocery store to a local tailor, then to a pharmacist, and finally into the savings account of a Greenwood bank. This circulation strengthened the district from within, allowing families to build savings, purchase property, and pass financial security to the next generation. In an era designed to limit black advancement, Greenwood quietly rewrote the rules through cooperation and shared commitment. Entertainment and culture thrived alongside commerce. Theaters offered a place where laughter, music, and storytelling brought people together after long days of work. Restaurants served as meeting grounds where deals were discussed, ideas exchanged, and community bonds reinforced. These spaces gave Greenwood its rhythm, reminding residents that prosperity was not only measured in money, but also in dignity and belonging. Education and professional services added another layer to this ecosystem. Doctors, lawyers, and educators operated successful practices, serving clients who trusted them not only for their skills, but for their understanding of shared struggles and aspirations. Children growing up in Greenwood saw examples of achievement at every turn, absorbing the belief that success was attainable and that leadership could look like them. This visibility shaped ambitions in ways that textbooks and speeches never could. What made Greenwood extraordinary was not any single business or building, but the way they functioned together as a unified whole. Each success reinforced another, creating a cycle of growth that was both resilient and fragile. Resilient because it was built on collective effort, and fragile because it existed within a society that often viewed Black prosperity with suspicion and resentment. Yet within the district itself, there was a sense of momentum, a feeling that Greenwood was moving forward despite the barriers beyond its borders. This economic strength was inseparable from the pride and confidence of its people. Greenwood stood as proof that self-sufficiency was not a theory, but a reality already achieved. It was a place where opportunity was created rather than requested, where community values guided progress, and where success carried a deeper meaning than profit alone. In understanding how Greenwood functioned day by day, we begin to see why its story mattered so profoundly, and why its rise left an imprint that could not be erased, even after its streets were silenced. Beyond the storefronts and busy streets, Greenwood's true strength revealed itself in the institutions that shaped daily life and long-term identity. The same spirit of cooperation that allowed businesses to thrive extended naturally into schools, churches, and civic organizations, creating a tightly woven social fabric that held the community together. Economic success gave Greenwood stability, but these institutions gave it meaning, direction, and endurance. Schools in Greenwood were more than places of instruction. They were spaces of affirmation in a world that often denied Black intellect and potential. Teachers understood that education was both a shield and a pathway, equipping children with skills while instilling confidence and discipline. Classrooms emphasized excellence not as a luxury, but as a necessity for survival and progress. Parents, business owners, and educators shared a common purpose, reinforcing the belief that the future of Greenwood depended on the minds being shaped within those walls. Every lesson carried an unspoken message. Knowledge was power, and it belonged to them. Churches stood at the heart of the district, anchoring Greenwood's moral and emotional life. On Sundays, they became gathering places where families found comfort, encouragement, and collective strength. Throughout the week, they served as centers for discussion, mutual aid, and organization. Sermons spoke not only of faith, but of responsibility, dignity, and perseverance. In a society structured to isolate and diminish, churches offered a space where voices were heard, struggles were shared, and hope was renewed. They transformed faith into action, reinforcing unity during both celebration and hardship. Civic organizations added another layer to this foundation, channeling Greenwood's energy into structured progress. Mutual aid societies, professional associations, and neighborhood groups worked to support the vulnerable, resolve disputes, and plan for the future. These organizations created systems of care that reduced dependence on outside institutions that often excluded or mistreated Black citizens. When challenges arose, Greenwood did not wait for solutions from beyond its borders. It relied on its own networks, built on trust and shared experience. Cultural pride flowed naturally from this environment. Greenwood was a place where traditions were preserved and adapted, where music, language, and social customs reflected a blend of heritage and modern ambition. Community events reinforced a sense of belonging, reminding residents that they were part of something larger than themselves. This pride was not loud or confrontational, but steady and confident, expressed through conduct, achievement, and mutual respect. It shaped how people carried themselves, how they raised their children, and how they envisioned their future. What tied these institutions together was a collective understanding that success required more than individual effort. Businesses generated wealth, but schools prepared minds to sustain it. Churches nurtured values that guided its use, while civic organizations ensured that progress remained inclusive and organized. Each element reinforced the others, creating a balance between ambition and responsibility. Greenwood functioned as an ecosystem where social cohesion was not enforced, but naturally cultivated through shared goals and mutual reliance. This cohesion also created resilience. When faced with external pressures, Greenwood's residents had systems in place to communicate, organize, and support one another. Trust, built over years of collaboration, allowed the community to respond as a unified whole rather than as isolated individuals. That unity became one of Greenwood's defining qualities, making it not only prosperous, but deeply rooted. In understanding Greenwood's schools, churches, and civic life, we see how the district became more than an economic success story. It was a living example of how community, education, and cultural pride could transform opportunity into identity, and how shared purpose could turn a neighborhood into a symbol of possibility. As Greenwood's businesses flourished and its institutions nurtured education, faith, and civic responsibility, the district's reputation began to travel far beyond the borders of Tulsa. What had started as a local effort to secure stability under segregation gradually transformed into something larger in the American imagination. Black Wall Street became a name spoken with admiration, curiosity, and, in some quarters, unease. It represented a living contradiction to the assumptions of the Jim Crow era, proving through everyday reality that African American ambition and capability could not be contained by imposed limits. Visitors arriving in Greenwood often carried stories back with them. They spoke of streets lined with enterprise, of professionals serving their own community with confidence and skill, and of families who owned property and planned for the future. These accounts circulated through newspapers, word of mouth, and personal networks, turning Greenwood into a reference point for what Black self-determination could look like when given space to grow. For many African Americans across the country, Black Wall Street offered something rare and powerful, a visible example of success built on autonomy rather than permission. This symbolic weight did not come from wealth alone. It emerged from the way Greenwood conducted itself. With discipline, cooperation, and a clear sense of purpose, entrepreneurship in the district was not driven solely by profit, but by responsibility to the community. Business owners understood that their success carried meaning beyond their own families, shaping opportunities for neighbors, employees, and future generations. Each thriving enterprise reinforced a shared narrative that resilience was not just about enduring hardship, but about constructing systems that could withstand it. During a period when laws and customs were designed to restrict movement, opportunity, and voice, Greenwood quietly asserted control over its own destiny. Residents did not wait for acceptance from a society that withheld it. Instead, they built parallel structures that met their needs and reflected their values. This approach turned self-reliance into a form of resistance. Not confrontational, but unmistakably assertive, it challenged prevailing ideas without speeches or slogans, simply by existing and succeeding. The name Black Wall Street captured this significance because it framed Greenwood in terms the wider nation understood. Wall Street symbolized power, influence, and economic authority. By invoking that comparison, Greenwood claimed a place within the American story of enterprise. While simultaneously redefining who could belong to it, the district showed that financial sophistication, strategic thinking, and long-term planning were not exclusive to any one group, but universal capabilities shaped by opportunity and vision. For young people growing up in Greenwood, This symbolism was lived rather than abstract. They saw role models in shop owners, educators, doctors, and community leaders who embodied control over their work and their future. For those outside the district, the idea of Black Wall Street expanded what seemed possible, offering a counter-narrative to the messages of limitation that dominated public life. It stood as proof that dignity and independence could be claimed, even within a deeply unequal system. Yet the very qualities that made Greenwood inspiring also made it fragile within its broader context. Its visibility drew attention, and attention carried consequences in a society uncomfortable with black autonomy. Still, before its trajectory was violently altered, Black Wall Street existed as a powerful demonstration of resilience in action. It was not merely a response to oppression, but a proactive vision of what could be achieved through unity, discipline, and belief in one's own worth. In this way, Black Wall Street became more than a district or a moment in history. It became a symbol of self-determination during the Jim Crow era, reminding the nation that progress could emerge even in the harshest conditions, and that the pursuit of independence, when shared and sustained, could reshape both communities and the stories they told about themselves. As Black Wall Street's reputation grew and its prosperity became impossible to ignore, the wider environment surrounding Greenwood began to shift. What had once been seen as a self-contained community gradually drew the attention of those beyond its borders, and that attention was not always neutral. Greenwood's success existed within a society structured by systemic racism and reinforced by segregation laws, and in that context, black achievement was often interpreted not as progress, but as a threat. For many white residents of Tulsa, Greenwood disrupted the social order they had been taught to accept. The presence of a self-sufficient black district challenged deeply ingrained assumptions about hierarchy and control. Businesses in Greenwood competed effectively. Professionals earned respect within their fields, and families accumulated property and stability. These realities contradicted the narratives used to justify exclusion and inequality, creating discomfort that hardened into resentment. Prosperity, when achieved by those expected to remain marginalized, unsettled the fragile sense of superiority on which segregation depended. Economic competition played a significant role in this tension. Greenwood's businesses did not rely on outside approval to thrive, and their success meant fewer customers and fewer opportunities flowing into white-owned establishments. In an era where economic power was closely tied to social influence, this shift was perceived as a loss rather than a shared gain. Instead of viewing Greenwood as a testament to the city's overall growth, many saw it as an independent force operating beyond their control, which intensified suspicion and hostility. Segregation laws further sharpened these divisions. Designed to separate communities and limit interaction, these laws reinforced the idea that racial boundaries should also define ambition and success. Greenwood violated that expectation simply by existing as a place of order, wealth, and confidence. Its streets told a story that segregation could not contain, and that contradiction created tension between the written rules of society and the reality unfolding in plain sight. Misinformation and rumor also played their part. Stories about Greenwood were often distorted as they spread, shaped by fear rather than fact. Success was exaggerated into arrogance, independence reframed as defiance, and normal community pride portrayed as provocation. These narratives circulated in environments already primed by racial bias, amplifying distrust and reinforcing divisions. The more Greenwood stood as a symbol of self-determination, the more it became a canvas onto which anxieties and prejudices were projected. Within Greenwood, residents were aware of these undercurrents, even as daily life continued with discipline and focus. Business owners, educators, and community leaders understood that their achievements existed within a fragile balance, shaped not only by internal cooperation but by external perception. Yet they continued to invest, build, and plan, holding on to the belief that stability and progress were worth pursuing despite the risks. Their response to resentment was not retreat, but perseverance, grounded in the systems they had carefully constructed. This growing divide revealed a deeper truth about the era. Greenwood's success exposed the contradictions at the heart of segregation, where claims of fairness and order collapsed under the weight of visible inequality. The district did not create tension simply by prospering. It revealed tensions that had always existed, brought into sharper focus by undeniable evidence of black capability and organization. As resentment intensified, the atmosphere around Greenwood became increasingly strained. Economic blended with racial ideology, creating a volatile mix that transformed achievement into provocation in the eyes of those unwilling to accept change. The story of Black Wall Street at this stage is not only about growth, but about the fragile space between progress and backlash, where success alone was enough to challenge the foundations of an unequal system. In tracing this moment, we see how Greenwood's rise illuminated the limits of tolerance within a segregated society. Its prosperity forced a reckoning, revealing how deeply racism shaped reactions to black advancement, and how quickly admiration could turn into hostility when long-standing assumptions were threatened. By the spring of 1921, the tensions that had quietly gathered around Greenwood reached a breaking point. The prosperity, pride, and independence that had once defined Black Wall Street now existed within an atmosphere thick with suspicion and hostility. What followed in late May and early June was not a sudden accident of history, but the tragic release of forces that had been building beneath the surface of a deeply divided society. In a matter of hours, Greenwood's orderly streets were overwhelmed. Homes that had been carefully built over years, businesses that represented lifetimes of effort, and institutions that anchored the community were reduced to ruins. The district that had stood as a symbol of possibility was systematically destroyed. Families fled in confusion, carrying what little they could, while familiar landmarks disappeared in smoke and chaos. The physical landscape of Black Wall Street was erased with shocking speed, leaving behind silence where there had once been energy and purpose. The human cost was devastating. Lives were lost, families were permanently altered, and a sense of security that Greenwood's residents had worked so hard to establish vanished overnight. Survivors were left not only without homes or livelihoods, but without the assurance that their achievements or even their existence would be protected. The destruction was so extensive that more than 1,000 houses and businesses were wiped away, transforming a thriving district into a scarred landscape almost beyond recognition. What made this moment especially painful was the contrast with everything Greenwood had represented just days earlier. This was a community that believed in order, discipline, and progress. Its residents had invested in education, commerce, and cooperation, trusting that stability and contribution would offer some measure of safety. Instead, they were confronted with the harsh reality that success alone could not shield them from a system that viewed black autonomy as unacceptable. In the aftermath, the devastation extended beyond the physical damage. Greenwood's people faced displacement, loss of income, and barriers to rebuilding that compounded the tragedy. Insurance claims were denied, assistance was limited, and many survivors were left to navigate recovery largely on their own. The structures that had once allowed wealth to circulate within the community were gone, replaced by uncertainty and struggle. What had taken decades to build was undone in a fraction of that time. The destruction of Greenwood also marked a turning point in how the story of Black Wall Street would be remembered. Or rather, forgotten. For years, what happened in Tulsa was pushed to the margins of public memory. The scale of the loss, the lives affected, and the broader meaning of the event were rarely acknowledged openly. Silence became an added burden for survivors, compounding their grief with the knowledge that their experience was being erased from the wider narrative. Yet even in devastation, the significance of Greenwood did not disappear. The very intensity of the destruction revealed how powerful the district had been as a symbol. It had challenged assumptions, disrupted economic and social hierarchies, and demonstrated what black self-determination could achieve. The effort to wipe it away underscored the threat that such success was perceived to pose within a segregated society. In telling this chapter of Greenwood's story, it becomes clear that the events of 1921 were not an isolated eruption of violence, but a reflection of the broader forces that shaped the era. The destruction of Black Wall Street stands as a reminder of how progress can provoke backlash, and how quickly achievement can be met with resistance when it exposes the contradictions of inequality. What was lost in Greenwood cannot be measured only in buildings or businesses. It was the interruption of momentum, the shattering of trust, and the forced pause of a future that had been carefully imagined. And yet, the memory of what Greenwood was before its destruction continues to matter, because it reveals both the heights that were reached and the costs of denying a community the right to thrive. When the destruction of Greenwood ended, the loss did not conclude with the clearing of debris or the passing of days. A quieter, more enduring aftermath followed, one defined not by noise or chaos, but by absence. The story of Black Wall Street, so vivid before 1921, began to fade from official memory, as if silence itself could undo what had happened. For decades, the events in Tulsa were largely excluded from textbooks, public records, and formal accounts, leaving survivors to carry their experiences without acknowledgement. This erasure shaped the lives of those who remained, families who had lost homes, businesses, and savings faced the challenge of rebuilding in an environment that offered little support. Without meaningful compensation, recovery depended on personal resilience rather than institutional assistance. Insurance claims were often denied, legal pathways were blocked, and opportunities to restore what had been taken were limited. The systems that might have provided relief instead reinforced loss, deepening the economic and emotional impact across generations. Silence also affected how Greenwood's story was understood beyond Tulsa. Without inclusion in schools or public discourse, the broader nation remained unaware of what Black Wall Street had represented and how it was destroyed. This absence shaped historical understanding, allowing myths of equal opportunity to persist without confrontation. The lack of acknowledgement was not neutral. It influenced how inequality was explained, minimized, or ignored, and it denied survivors the validation that comes with being seen and heard. Within Greenwood's former residence, memory survived in personal stories passed quietly between generations. Parents told children about streets that no longer existed, businesses that once thrived, and neighbors who had been part of a tightly knit community. These recollections were acts of preservation in the absence of official recognition. They kept alive the truth of what Greenwood had been and what had been lost, even as public narratives remained incomplete. The absence of compensation carried long-term consequences. Without restored property or financial redress, many families were unable to recover the wealth that had been destroyed. This loss extended beyond individual households, affecting community stability and limiting opportunities for future generations. What had once been a model of economic circulation and self-sufficiency became a cautionary example of how quickly progress could be undone, and how difficult it was to reclaim without institutional support. As years turned into decades, the silence surrounding Greenwood became part of the story itself. The decision not to teach or document what happened reflected broader patterns of selective memory, where uncomfortable truths were set aside to maintain a simplified narrative of progress. In this environment, the destruction of Black Wall Street was treated as an anomaly rather than a consequence of systemic forces, further obscuring its significance. Only much later did efforts emerge to bring Greenwood's history into public view, driven by scholars, descendants, and community advocates determined to confront the past. These efforts highlighted not only the events of 1921, but the long period of neglect that followed. Recognition. when it came, revealed how deeply the absence of accountability had shaped outcomes, reinforcing disparities that began with destruction and continued through denial. The story of Greenwood's exclusion from textbooks and records underscores a critical truth. History is shaped not only by what is recorded, but by what is omitted. For survivors, the lack of compensation and acknowledgement was a continuation of loss, one that extended far beyond the original devastation. Yet the persistence of memory, carried through families and communities, ensured that Greenwood was not entirely erased. In revisiting this chapter, the focus is not solely on what was denied, but on what endured. The survival of Greenwood's story, despite decades of silence, reveals the power of lived experience to challenge omission and restore meaning. It reminds us that recognition matters, not as a symbolic gesture alone, but as a step toward understanding how the past continues to shape the present. Black Wall Street remains far more than a chapter in history. It stands as a powerful case study in how racial violence, economic injustice, and systemic inequality can alter the course of generations. Greenwood's rise demonstrated what was possible when opportunity, discipline, and community aligned, while its destruction revealed how fragile that progress became when success collided with entrenched racism. Together, these realities form a complete story, one that cannot be understood by looking only at prosperity or tragedy, but by examining how the two were inseparably connected. The legacy of Black Wall Street forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about loss that extends beyond buildings and lives. When Greenwood was destroyed and reparations were denied, the damage did not end in 1921. Wealth that could have been passed down, businesses that might have expanded, and institutions that could have shaped future leaders were erased. The long-term impact of that loss is visible in persistent economic gaps and unequal access to opportunity. Greenwood shows us that injustice is not only about what is taken in a moment, but about what is prevented from ever being rebuilt. At the same time, the story challenges the idea that progress fails because of a lack of effort or vision. Greenwood had both. It was carefully built through entrepreneurship, education, and cooperation, proving that African American communities were capable of extraordinary achievement even under restrictive systems. Its destruction and the silence that followed highlight how systemic inequality operates, not only by limiting access, but by refusing accountability when harm is done. In this way, Black Wall Street becomes a mirror, reflecting how societies choose to remember, ignore, or confront their own contradictions. Yet there is also resilience embedded in this legacy. Despite decades of omission, Greenwood's story endured through memory, scholarship, and renewed public attention. It continues to educate, challenge, and inspire discussions about justice, recognition, and responsibility. Remembering Black Wall Street is not about dwelling on loss alone. It is about understanding how history shapes the present and how acknowledgement can become a step toward meaningful change. As we conclude this story, what Greenwood leaves us with is not a simple lesson, but a question: what does a society owe to communities whose progress was destroyed and never restored? And what happens when stories like this are fully recognized rather than hidden? Black Wall Street invites us to think beyond symbols and consider the real, lasting consequences of denied justice. Thank you for taking the time to watch and reflect on this history. If you found this story meaningful and believe that these conversations matter, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to support more in-depth historical documentaries. Your support helps keep stories like Black Wall Street visible, remembered, and part of the ongoing conversation about our shared past and future.